This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. Everybody wanted to hear about this topic. This is the hot issue of the day. On June 25th, 2006, the IDF soldier Gilad Shalit was captured at Kerem Shalom Crossing. He's held for 5 years until 2011, and then he was exchanged for 1,027 prisoners. Among those 1,027 prisoners was an operative who was serving 29 life sentences. He was involved in the 2002 suicide bombing in the Tanya Park Hotel. He was involved in the 2003 bombing of Cafe Hillel. Released at that time were 2 terrorists who abducted soldier Nachshon Waxman. But they traded 1,027 terrorists for Gilad Shalit. And another one of the terrorists who was released was Sinwar. He had joined Hamas in 1987. He was captured in 1989. At the time that these 1,027 terrorists were released, they had already been responsible for the deaths of over 500 Jews. And now it's more than 2,500 Jews. So in retrospect, you could look back and how painful it is to have to make such an exchange. Because you're exchanging the life of one Jew for literally thousands. And that's the question of the day. Should we try to redeem hostages in exchange for terrorists? What do you think these terrorists are going to do when they're released? You think they in jail did the tshuva of the Rekeach? You think they were doing tshuvas hamishkal? You think they were repentant? I mean, once they're released, they have nothing to lose. What do you think they're going to do? That's the moral dilemma that's involved in exchanging hostages. And of course, whatever we're going to learn today is all academic, it's all theoretical, because none of us are privy to any inside information. One thing's for sure, none of us really know what's going on behind the scenes in Israel, what they know, what they don't know. But Torah hi v'lomad anutzarach, from a halachic perspective, let's try to get some insight into what is a halachic viewpoint on going above and beyond to rescue a Jew that has been captured. The subject we're going to speak about today is Pidyon Shvuyim b'halacha, redeeming captives in Jewish halacha. The Rambam tells us in Hilchos Matnas Aniyim, number 1 on your sheets, Pidyon Shvuyim koidem lefarnasas aniyim. Redeeming captives takes precedence over supporting the poor, ulachsoisan, covering them. Ve'ein lecha mitzvah gedoyla kepidyon shvuyin. There is no greater mitzvah than redeeming captives. There's no greater mitzvah in the Torah than redeeming captives. Shehashavo is someone who's captive. Harehu b'chlal hareivim, v'hatzmeim, v'ha'arumim. Someone who is captive, is hungry, is thirsty, is unclothed. His life is in danger. Someone who hides their eye from redeeming a captive. You violate, don't harden your heart. Don't close your hand. You're violating, don't stand by idly when your friend's blood is on the line. You are being mavatel the mitzvah of tzedakah and the mitzvah of v'chayochicha imach, and you're being mavatel the mitzvah of yahavta l'recha kamoicha. Ve'ein lecha mitzvah rabba kepidyon shvuyim. There's no greater mitzvah than redeeming captives. The question is, how much do you have to pay? Is there a price which is too heavy? So the Mishnah says in Masechta Gittin, Ein poidin es hashvuyin. Number 2 on your sheets, Gittin memhei, yesar al kadei demeim. You do not pay more than their value. whatever value a person would command on the slave market, $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, you're not allowed to pay more. It's prohibited. You're doing an aveira. Not that you're not allowed, not just you're not supposed to. It's sinful. You're a sinner. You're wicked. You're a wicked if you do it. Not you're not required to, or you don't have to. You're considered a murderer if you do it. You're not allowed to do it. You can't do it. We'll have to see. Says the Mishnah, why not? Mibnei tikkun ha'olam. For the benefit of society. For the benefit of society, you can redeem captives for more than their value. So the Gemara wants to know, what does that mean because of the benefit of society? How is it beneficial to society not to pay more than the captive is worth? Says the Gemara, Misham duchka desibura. You're placing undue hardship on the community. The community has limited funds. People have to pay tuition. People have to send their kids to school. People have to pay the bills. People have to support their family. They cannot be in a situation where they're overextending themselves to save someone who was captured. I mean, we feel bad that the person is captured, but not everyone has to be held hostage because one guy is held hostage. Why does the community have to be held hostage because of one individual? That's the first rationale of the Gemara. The Gemara says, Oidilmo, or perhaps that's not the reason. Maybe the reason is, Mishum delay lagarbu v'lai sitfei. Maybe the reason is because if you're going to pay extra money, you're incentivizing the kidnapping of Jews. So you're actually a sinner. If you pay $1 million to rescue a hostage, you think you're doing that guy a favor, but now you're putting the life of every member of the community in peril, because what you're doing is you're empowering, you're just inciting them to keep on doing this. You know, if you pay them a small amount, they don't have a lot to gain to continue. But when you pay them extra funds, you're just incentivizing the kidnapping. And the Gemara does not come to a conclusion. The Gemara does not come to a conclusion in terms of what is the reason why you can't pay more than the value of a captive to redeem the captive. Is it because we can't place undue hardship on the tzibor, or is it because we don't want to incentivize the continuous kidnap of Jews? Rashi says, what difference does it make what the rationale is? What distinction in halacha, what case would spell a difference between whether the reason is that we don't want to put undue hardship on the tzibor, or we don't want to incentivize the capture of more Jews? Says Rashi, the nafkamina is, let's say you have a rich uncle or a rich relative. So the burden of redeeming the captive is not falling on the tzibor. You have a rich relative who's willing to take it on his shoulders. So if the reason is we don't want to put an undue hardship on the tzibor, we're not putting the responsibility on the tzibor. We have a relative who's going to step in and redeem the captive. But if the reason is that we're incentivizing it, so it doesn't matter who's paying the money. If somebody's going to go ahead and pay these kidnappers excessive funds, you're incentivizing the capture of more Jewish hostages. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Gittin on Daf Nun Ches, the Gemara tells us a story. Take a look in your sheets on number 4. Tanu Rabbanan, Masa b'Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. There's a story. The story is about Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Shahalach lekrach gadol shabaraymi. Yeshua ben Chananya went to the great city of Rome. Amrulai, they said to him, Tinoik echad yesh bebeis ha'asurim. There's a young child in captivity. Yefei einayim, beautiful eyes. V'toiv roi, beautiful appearance. Uktsoisaisav sduris le'taltalem. And his hair was arranged very handsomely in locks. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya goes to the opening of the jail and he begins to recite the beginning of a pasuk. The pasuk says, the pasuk read, Minasan lemeshisa Yaakov v'Yisrael leboizezin. And the child was able to complete the end of the pasuk, and the child said, Haloi Hashem zu chatanulai v'loi avu b'drachav halach. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya was stunned. Unbelievable. Here it is, I'm in the jail. I say the beginning of an obscure pasuk, and this child finishes the pasuk. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya cannot believe the potential of this child. He says, Muftachani bay, I am assured. Shemoira Hayrabi Yisrael, that this young child will one day be a decisor of halacha in Israel. Ha'avoida, Rabbi Shua ben Chananya says, I swear, she'eni zaz mikan ad she'aftan b'chamakam she'b'mamayim. I will pay all the money in the world to redeem this captive. Says the Gemara, it was not shortly after until this child became a great halachic authority. Who is he? Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Beautiful story. You have a young child in jail. He shows great promise in his studies. He was able to complete an obscure pasuk. Rabbi Shua ben Chananya said, I swear I'll pay all the money in the world to redeem this captive. He redeems him, and sure enough, this child turns out to be Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Asks Tosfos. That's very nice, the story had a happy ending. But how is Rabbi Shua ben Chananya allowed to spend all the money in the world? But Chazal tell us, the Mishnah says, you cannot redeem captives for more than their value. So he wasn't allowed to do this. So it's very nice this child ended up being a Jewish leader. But so what? It's against the halacha. It's prohibited to do so. Tosfos gives two answers. Tosfos says, number one, you're right. In general, you cannot redeem captives for more than their value. But someone who displays exceptional wisdom and exceptional promise to becoming a great Talmid Chacham, you could redeem them for more than their value. That's the first answer of Tosfos. Meaning, halachically, you cannot spend more than the market value to redeem a captive, unless they show great promise that one day they could become a Talmid Chacham. Or, says Tosfos, it was the time of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. It was the time of the destruction of the temple. What's the reason you're not to redeem captives for more than their value? Because we don't want to incite them and inspire them to take more hostages. But at the time of the destruction of the temple, that's what they're doing anyway. We don't need to incite them. We don't need to give them any incentives. That's what they're doing. Therefore, under those circumstances, you're allowed to redeem captives for more than their value. I want to turn your attention now to another Tosfos, only 13 blot later in the Gemara, where Tosfos speaks about a situation where a captive was redeemed for more than their value. And Tosfos gives an entirely different answer. Again, let's clarify. The first Tosfos in Masechta Gittin gives two exceptions to the rule of when you're allowed to redeem captives for more than the value. Exception number one is if somebody displays exceptional promise that they could become a great Talmid Chacham, a great Torah sage. Number two, Tosfos says, at the time of the destruction of the temple, at the time of the Churban, you're allowed to redeem captives for more than their value. Comes the next Tosfos, and Tosfos says another interesting chidush, another original Torah insight. He says that if somebody's life is in danger, you're allowed to redeem them for more than their value. When does the Mishnah teach you can't redeem captives for more than their value? That's if they're just held captive, but they're being fed and they're being kept alive. But if somebody's life was in danger, you'd be allowed to redeem captives for more than their value. Or, says Tosfos, the individual being redeemed was of exceptional wisdom, and therefore he was allowed to be redeemed. So, altogether, if you add it up, Tosfos in two places deals with the issue of are you allowed to redeem captives for more than their value? And Tosfos gives a total of three answers, two on Daf Memhei and two on Daf Nunches. And it's a little bit unusual why Tosfos gives some answers in one place and some answers in a different place. But the three answers are, someone who could become a great Talmid Chacham, you could redeem them for more than their value. Answer number two, at the time of the Churban Beis HaMikdash, you're allowed to redeem more than the value. Answer number three, if somebody's life is in jeopardy, you could redeem them for more than their value. Now, coming to our times for a moment, to redeem a hostage, to redeem somebody that's taken captive by Hamas, to trade them in for 100 terrorists is certainly more than their value. No question. You say, well, maybe not. Maybe one of ours is worth more than one of theirs. Maybe one of ours is worth more than 100 of one of theirs. Yeah, but you can't look at it that way. Because you have to look at it in terms of Jewish life. And giving back 100 terrorists, for all intents and purposes, means more than the cost of one Jewish life. Because these guys, when they're let out of prison, they're not going to play bingo. They're not playing board games when they come out of prison. We know what they say. We know what they promise to do. So we have to examine the poskim and the later authorities of what is the halacha l'maisa of whether you are allowed to redeem a captive for more than their value in a situation where somebody's life is on the line. So the first authority who discusses this question is the Maharam Lublin. The Maharam Lublin lived from 1558 to 1616. Rav Meir of Lublin. He was a student of Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen Shapiro, the Rosh Yeshiva of Krakow, who he then became the son-in-law of the Rosh Yeshiva of Krakow. And he opened up a great yeshiva in Lublin, and he was the Rebbe of the Shlah HaKadosh, the Megala Amukais, Rabbi Yeshua Charif, the Meginei Shloimei, Rav Meir Katz, the father of the Shach. Rabbi Katz, are you related to the Shach? Okay. Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Shor. These were some of the Talmidim of Maharam Lublin. And he deals with the following question in Shaila Tesvav. The question was, a young man who was taken prisoner by the Yishmaeli police force, because he was suspected of having relations with a Zoina Yishmaelis, and they wanted to charge him for a capital offense. And the question is it halachically required, is it halachically permitted to bail him out for more than his value? And the Maharam Lublin paskind, you're allowed to bail him out, but you cannot pay 1 penny more than his value. Not only do you not have to, you're not allowed to. It is prohibited. The Gemara says we're not permitted to redeem captives for more than their value, either because it puts undue hardship on the tzibor, or because it will just incite them to capture more. And nobody argues. And if you're going to say, well, they're going to kill him and his life is on the line, says Maharam Lublin, you will not find any credible posek who says that if someone's life is on the line, you're allowed to redeem them for more than their value. Therefore, it is prohibited to redeem this Jew whose life is in peril. That was the psak of the Maharam Lublin. Comes the Maharshak, quoted in the Pischei Tshuva, and the Maharshak in the Sefer Beis Hillel asks, what do you mean we don't find a credible posek that if someone's life is on the line, you're allowed to redeem them for more than their value? Is Tosfos not a credible posek? Tosfos says, yes, granted, you can redeem a captive for more than its value. But if it's a situation of sakanas nefashos, if it's a situation where somebody's life is on the line, you're allowed to redeem them for more than their value. So why is the Maharam Lublin seemingly has forgotten about Tosfos in Gittin on Daf Nun Ches? Why didn't the Maharam Lublin cite and invoke the opinion of Tosfos that it's true you can redeem a captive for more than its value, but if someone's life is on the line, you should do so? That's the $1 million question here. How could the Maharam Lublin just definitively issue a ruling that irrespective of whether someone's life is on the line, you cannot pay more than their value, when Tosfos has already carved out an exception that if someone's life is on the line, it's permitted to redeem them for more than their value? So you ready for this chidush? Fasten your seatbelts. Comes Rabbi Cheskel Katzenellenbogen, Shailas Utshuvas Knesses Yecheskel, 1668 to 1749. He was the Rosh Av Bezin of the communities of Ehu, Altona, Hamburg, Wansbach. And he has an amazing breakthrough on this sugya. Friends, do you think you should be allowed to redeem a Jewish captive for more than its value, even if their life is on the line? Or should we not be allowed to redeem them, even if their life is on the line? What would you say? Should it make a difference whether somebody's life is on the line? Could you hear a distinction that when are we not required to redeem a captive for more than its value? That's if their life is not in jeopardy. But if their life is on the line, maybe we do have to redeem them for more than their value. Says the Knesset Yechezkel, you know what? Come to think of it, it's going to be dependent on the two answers of the Gemara. Why are you not allowed to redeem captives for more than its value? If the reason why you're not allowed to redeem captives for more than its value is because it's putting undue hardship on the tzibur, it's oppressive to the tzibur, it's hard enough to pay the bills as it is. And now, if you're going to have to redeem a captive for more than its value, it's going to put undue hardship on the tzibur. Yeah, when can you not put undue hardship on the tzibur? That's if someone's life is not on the line. But if someone's life is on the line, what is the requirement of a Jew to rescue the life of another Jew? Which pasuk in the Torah says that you can stand by idly when someone's life is in jeopardy? The pasuk is, Lo samoid al dam reyacha. You can't stand by idly when someone else is dying. Friends, how much money do you need to pay to rescue someone's life? This is a general question. How much money do you have to pay on a mitzvah? Let's say you live in a city where it's very hard to get a lulav and esrog, and it's going to cost you $500,000. Are you required to spend $500,000 on a lulav and esrog? Are you required to spend $500,000 on a pair of tefillin? By the way, tefillin are very expensive. If you got a pair of tefillin for $250, you need to get yourself a new pair of tefillin, because the likelihood that your tefillin are actually kosher, you can't get a really kosher pair for that little money. Tefillin costs money. A good pair is going to cost you real dollars. How much money does a person have to spend to do a mitzvah? 1/5 of your money. There's a cap. Halachically, you don't have to spend more than 1/5 of your money to perform a mitzvah. But what about not to violate a lav in the Torah? What about not to violate a lav in the Torah? Let's say somebody says, eat the pork, otherwise I'm going to take away your money. You have to give up all your money not to eat the non-kosher food. By the way, any prohibition in the Torah, biblical or rabbinic, you have to give up all your money not to violate. Let's say, we're talking about talking by davening, right? Let's say somebody comes over to you. Talk now by davening, by chazar sashatz, or I'm going to take away all your money. You have to give up all your money and not do it. You have to give up all your money not to violate any lav midairaiso or midrabanan. There's no cap. A positive command, you only have to spend 1/5 of your money. Not to violate a negative command, all your money. So if somebody is dying, you have to give up all your money, seemingly to save their life. So if the reason why you're not allowed to redeem a captive for more than the value is because it's oppressive to the community, so then that might be true if the person's life is not on the line. But if the person's life is on the line, you can't stand by idly while somebody's dying because you want to hold on to the money in your bank account. You got to give all the money in the world. But, says the Knesset Yechezkel, but if the reason why you're not allowed to redeem captives for more than the value is because you're incentivizing the continuous kidnapping of Jews, then if the person's life is on the line, you're certainly not allowed to overpay for the rescue, because if you do so, now you're not only incentivizing kidnapping, you're incentivizing murder. And you're a murderer if you do it. You're not allowed to pay excessive funds, because then you're not only causing further kidnapping, you're causing the murder of more Jews. So says the Knesset Yechezkel, the argument of Tosfos, that if someone's life is on the line, you have to pay more than their value, that only works out according to the opinion in the Gemara that you're not allowed to overpay because it's oppressive to the tzibur. But according to the argument in the Gemara that you're not allowed to overpay because you're incentivizing, Deloi legarvu tfei, you're not allowed to pay more than their value, even if their life is on the line. So now we have to look in the Rishonim. Which reason of the Gemara is codified, lahalacha, of why you can't redeem captives for more than the value? So look in the Rambam. You have it on your sheet. By the way, you could keep all the handouts, no extra charge. Rabbi Katz will not charge you extra. If you want to pay more than the value, you may. If you want to pay a lot more than the value, you could give it to Gacheles. They'll give half of it to Zaka and the other half to Tzitzis for the... Or you could give it to the Yarchei Kallah itself. If you want to pay...
Yarchei Kallah also needs money, besides.
Yeah, if anybody would like to sponsor the Yarchei Kallah, they could also. And if you want to pay more than the value, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as more than the value of this Yarchei Kallah. Okay, so look in the Rambam. The Rambam codifies, bottom line, that the reason why you can't redeem captives for more than the value is otherwise you're incentivizing the continuous kidnapping of Jewish hostages. Comes the Knesset Yecheskel. The reason why the Maram Lubin definitively said that you cannot redeem a captive for more than its value, even if someone's life is on the line. Oh, but we asked, didn't he forget about Tosfos, who makes an exception if someone's life is on the line? No, that Tosfos was within the answer of the Gemara, that the reason why you can't redeem captives is because it's oppressive. But according to the other answer of the Gemara, that it's incentivizing, there is no exception even if someone's life is on the line. According to Maram Lublin, it would come out, you can never redeem a captive for more than their value unless the person is a great Talmid Chacham. That would be the only exception. Comes the Yam Shel Shlomo, and he disagrees. The Yam Shel Shlomo says that in our generation, when there's so few Jews left in the world, you know what Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes? The greatest miracle in the history of the world is the eternity of the Jewish people. The continuous existence of Klal Yisrael. The fact that there's a Yarchei Kallah in Amsterdam 70 years after the Holocaust is not highly improbable, is not statistically unlikely. It's a miracle of epic proportions. That there's still Jews today poring over the ancient texts of the Gemara as if nothing has happened to us. It's a great miracle. And therefore nowadays every Jew is so valuable. If you have the opportunity to rescue a Jew even more than his value, you should do so. By the way, what's interesting to know historically, one of the all-time great rabbis, Maram Rothenberg, was imprisoned in a castle in Einsesheim. And they imposed upon the community an exorbitant sum. And the Maram Lublin paskined that they cannot redeem him. And the Yam Shel Shlomo says, I can't understand. Why would he not allow them to redeem him? After all, he is the Talmid Chacham of the generation. Wasn't he concerned for the future of the Torah? But the Maram Lublin made a calculated decision that if he issues a ruling that they cannot redeem him, then they will be de-incentivized. And they will lose any motivation to continue to do so. Because we know after they imprisoned the Maram Lublin, they tried to look for the Rosh. And the Rosh had to run away to Spain. But after this episode, never again was a great rabbi taken hostage for money. Because the Maram Lublin had the courage to say, no, you can't redeem me. But the Yam Shel Shlomo paskins that in a situation where someone's life is on the line, you could pay more than their value. What? Merami Rothenberg. Neither. The Yam Shel Shlomo paskins halacha l'maisa that if somebody's life is on the line, you would be able to redeem them. Let's take it to our times. Because in our times, this is not an issue of money. Because when you're redeeming these captives, you're not paying Hamas to redeem a captive. You're basically what you're doing is, you're not trading money for Jewish lives. You're unfortunately trading Jewish lives for Jewish lives. Because if you're releasing terrorists, as we said, these terrorists are not going out and doing community service now in be'anivos and with humility. The moment they're rescued, they pledge to continue their activities. So the question is, there's no question that this is yeser mikadei demeim, whether this is more than their value. It certainly is. The question is, are you allowed to free one Jewish life if it's going to be at the expense down the road of perhaps many Jewish lives? And this is a very painful question. Who could make such a decision? The families of the hostages, somebody asked, is it wrong of the families of the hostages to pressure the government to release their family, to free their family in exchange for terrorists? How could anybody judge the families of the hostages? We don't have any really poskim that discuss this precise issue of exchanging terrorists for hostages. Although halachically, you would think, how could it be halachically correct to free one Jewish hostage in exchange for many terrorists? We do have somewhat of a similar situation that was actually discussed by Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. It's brought in his Tshuvos. It's also quoted in a sefer called Masa Ovadia. Masa Ovadia is a sefer on contemporary issues discussed by Rabbi Ovadia in the state of Israel. And Rabbi Ovadia is discussing specifically the Entebbe raid, whether it was halachically correct for the Israeli government to negotiate with terrorists, because, by the way, they were in negotiation. Part of the whole tactic was they were in negotiation. We were going to release many terrorists in exchange for the hostages in Uganda, and it fell through. It was going to happen, it wasn't going to happen, and miraculously Hashem gave success to the IDF, and they were able to come in, and they were pretty much matzliach in rescuing these hostages. But Rabbi Ovadia was asked, are you allowed to trade terrorists for hostages? And Rabbi Ovadia gave a very surprising answer. Rabbi Ovadia said that it was permitted to do so. Permitted to do so? How could it be permitted to do so? Now you have to understand, this wasn't like the Gilad Shalit situation, where you're exchanging 1,027 terrorists for one soldier. This was, pretty much, there were many Jews held hostage, and they were going to release many terrorists. Rabbi Ovadia offered the following incredible analogy. Okay? You have to put on what I call your lumdish glasses. Now I want to tell you something. I'm stepping over here, and I'm telling you something as a friend. We have a lot of intelligent people here. We have lawyers, we have doctors, we have scientists, we have mathematicians. I want to share something with you. Until you strain yourself to learn Gemara with Tosfos, you have never experienced an intellectual challenge, no matter what career or discipline you are in life. There is no intellectual stimulation like the rigorous analysis of the Talmudic process of Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos. There is no discipline in the world that comes close to it, and there's no greater happiness and satisfaction than rolling up your sleeves and digging into a Gemara with Rishonim and Mefarshim. I'm not telling you this as a rabbi. I'm telling you this from experience, and I'm telling you this as a friend. Says Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, question: does halacha allow an autopsy? Are you allowed to perform an autopsy on a dead body? The answer is no. What's wrong with performing an autopsy? It's called nivul hames. You're disgracing a dead body. You're not allowed to defile a dead body. It's a lav in the Torah. It's one of the 365 prohibitions in the Torah. What if performing an autopsy on someone who has a specific illness you will come up with medical knowledge to be able to cure someone who's dying on the next table. Are you allowed to perform an autopsy on A to save the life of B here and now? Absolutely. Because v'chai b'hem, you're allowed to violate any prohibition in the Torah to save Jewish life, except for serving idols, except for adultery, and except for murder. You're allowed to even desecrate the Shabbos to save a Jewish life. You're allowed to perform an autopsy to save a Jewish life. But what if by performing the autopsy, you're not going to be saving a life in front of you now, but through the medical knowledge that you gain, you'll be able to save lives in the future. The saving of future Jewish life, is that called pikuach nefashos? Is that called saving Jewish life, that you could violate the prohibition of conducting an autopsy? No. No. Future saving of life is not pikuach nefashos. In halacha, the possibility, albeit a realistic one, of saving Jewish lives in the future is not considered hatzalas nefashos. It will not allow performance of an autopsy. So you could have somebody, he's dying of an illness, and if we do an autopsy on him, we could gain medical knowledge and save Jewish lives in the future. You're not allowed to do it. If it's someone right in front of you, you could do it. You could violate any life to save a Jewish life, but not life in the future. It's considered too remote, although it's a reasonable possibility. Says Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, conversely, if the future saving of life is not considered hatzalas nefashos, you could make the case the future risk of life is not necessarily considered halachically endangering life. Therefore, argues Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, even though if you save Reuven's life, it will come at the expense of freeing terrorists, which means that in the future there's a strong, unfortunately reasonable possibility you're placing other people's lives in peril. But is it today? It's not today. Today, they have the security band around their leg. The Israeli government is hot on their tails. But it's tomorrow. The same way saving Jewish life tomorrow is not considered saving life, risking Jewish life tomorrow may not be considered risking Jewish life in halacha. And therefore Rabbi Ovadia argues, perhaps you would be allowed to save a Jewish life in exchange for a terrorist. Now you need big shoulders to make that argument. Because you could argue, performing an autopsy to save a life in the future, maybe that's a remote possibility that you're going to save a life. But freeing a terrorist, it's not a remote possibility that you're putting people's lives in danger. Okay? You need to be up there to make a call like that. I believe I once saw another argument that Rabbi Ovadia used, why perhaps you would be allowed to save the life of a Jewish hostage by releasing a terrorist, but this would only apply to an Israeli soldier, not necessarily to a regular citizen. This may not apply to a citizen who is taken hostage, but it would apply to a soldier. And Rabbi Ovadia offered the following argument. When a soldier goes out to war, and he's defending our country, and he's defending our people, he has to know we have his back. For him to give it his all, for him to put his life on the line, for him to go out there and give up everything, he has to know deep down that if he's ever captured, we're going to do whatever it takes to rescue him. Otherwise, he can't fight properly on the battlefield. Therefore, it's in the interest of the entire state and the entire country and the entire Jewish people that the policy is that when one of our boys goes down, we're going to do everything it takes to get him back, even at our own expense. That's also very something to think about. When these things happen, I don't think they necessarily come and they ask a question of the greatest halachic authorities of the time. But you should know there is no issue in life that is above and beyond the purview of the Gemara and the Poskim. Every possible issue that comes up in life, halacha has something to say about it. And if you read the halachic response of the great Poskim, you'd be surprised that every moral, ethic dilemma, you will find clarity in the pages of Talmud Bavli. We hope that in the merit of us studying the subject, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah is the most powerful force in the universe. In the merit of our learning of the subject of Pidyon Shvuyim, may we all hear only Besuros Tovos, and we should hear about the miraculous rescue and freedom of all of our brothers and sisters, and we should only hear Besuros Tovos, Me'artzenu HaKadosha, with the ultimate Geula Shalema, B'Biaskal Tzedek, V'Mher V'Yameinu, Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.